We made this.
Welcome back everyone to a podcast all about the sounds of cinema and a little bit of TV today, and discussion about them between the notes, which is where we come in. I'm Tony Black.
And I'm Sean Wilson.
And this week we bring you discussion of music from Ryuichi Sakamoto, Laura Karpman, Michael Giacchino and more, as we discuss for the first time in 2020 some new releases, as cinemas are finally starting to release some new content as well as the content that has been out online. And I suppose that's the thing, isn't it, Sean? We haven't really covered particularly new films. There have been things on streaming services here and there. There have been things, just released into the home. But now with the release of films over the last few weeks, such as things like Proxima, which we're going to talk about, American Pickle, and obviously now Tenet, which we're going to do a little bit of a first impression of before we go into more detail later, it feels like maybe the right time to start talking about some of the music, given things are now starting to open up a bit more, maybe?
It almost feels like we're coming out of a chrysalis or a cocoon, doesn't it? It's like, there is stuff. There is stuff that we can engage with. Music, films, television, yeah. It's really wonderful, actually. I mean, being able to talk about this from a personal point of view almost feels like I'm nudging back towards some kind of normality again, having been sort of shut off from it. But yeah, actually, it's a really, really diverse range of content that we've got here for multifaceted films and TV shows. TV is great, actually, because TV has obviously stepped into the breach over the last few months. So yeah, looking forward to engaging with these.
Yeah, and this will probably be a slightly shorter episode than the normal ones we do, because we're not going to do any like top 10 lists or focus on a specific thing as we have done for a while, because we're keen to try and get back in touch with some newer music. We're still going to do some of that. We're still going to come back and do some episodes like that as well. But this one might be a little bit shorter as we just pick through some of these scores and just generally talk about them. So I think we'll start today with An American Pickle, which is the new film starring Seth Rogen and produced by Rogen and his usual producing partner Evan Goldberg, based on a book by Simon Rich, who also writes the screenplay, which is about a Jewish immigrant who is preserved in a vat of pickles and wakes up in modern-day New York in an attempts to fit in with his last remaining descendant, which is also played by Seth Rogen. So it's a comedy directed by Brandon Trost in his directorial debut, and it transports Jewish immigrants from like the 1910s through to the late 2010s. So yeah, the thing with this is that even though it's quite a fun little comedy that aired on HBO Max, I think, in America, and has come out into cinemas in that sort of limited release as everything's getting right now in the UK. This actually has a score partly by none other than Michael Giacchino, who obviously is one of the biggest composers out there, but also by another composer called Nami Melumad, who is an Israeli-Dutch film and TV composer based in LA. And I think probably one of the ways she came into contact with Giacchino is through scoring an episode of Star Trek Short Treks called Q&A, which I haven't seen yet because those short treks haven't been released in the UK. She would then have been involved in the big connected sort of bad robot production stable that J.J. Abrams sort of created, and obviously Giacchino is connected to Star Trek, so there's every possibility maybe she came into his orbit in that sense partly. But this is a interesting collaboration, Sean, I think, and of all the scores we're talking about today that I've fully heard, I think American Pickle is the best, actually, the nicest.
Yeah, I think this was a really delightful surprise. I probably one of the most charming comedy scores I've heard in a while, actually, with proper themes and a proper sense of time and place, because clearly the storyline is zeroing in on a very, very specific immigrant experience, the late sort of 20th 21st century immigrant experience, Jewish immigrant experience. So what that does is that informs a very, very specific tapestry for the score, and the instrumentation is lovely. There's like fiddle, there's accordion, there's recorder, there's clarinet, and there's lots of bits. I mean, unsurprisingly, there's bits that reminded me of George Gershwin, like the few little like polkas and things like that. I thought it was a really lovely, charming little score. And what I understand is that I think Michael Giacchino wrote the main theme and Nami Melumad fleshed that out. She, it's my understanding that she orchestrated it and probably developed those themes beyond their basic principles. But I mean, I think Michael Giacchino's influence is all over the album, because there are some very, very funny track titles on the album that which speaks of Michael Giacchino, because he always does that. He when I interviewed him a few years ago, he says he always has a competition with his music editor as to who can come up with the silliest most pun-based track titles. So it does appear to be a kind of fusion of his input and Nami Melumad's kind of intuitive ability to create the right soundscape for the two characters played by Seth Rogen. But yeah, I thought this was a really lovely score.
I suppose it's like, it's almost easy to forget that Michael Giacchino, because he sort of inspires so many of these big, broad, massive blockbusters. I think he does enjoy sort of dabbling in this kind of stuff as well, at the same time where he can. And actually, I think Nami Melumad does a great job in fleshing a lot of this out. And actually, I think taking what at times does feel like quite definably sort of Giacchino stylings, but actually inflecting them with particular sounds that, evoke the Jewish experience, evoke the immigrant experience, while being light, while being fun, while being, it's a bit like when Giacchino scores things like Spider-Man, where he has those lighter tones in there, those much more comedic tones. But I was really surprised by this. Like we haven't seen two of the films we're talking about today yet, because they've been out in cinemas and we haven't been back to the cinema to see them. So I don't think either of us have seen An American Pickle yet. But if the film's anything as good as the score, then it should be good. I think it's got mixed reviews, the movie, but yeah, this score is certainly one of the better ones I think I've actually heard this year. So yeah, I was really quite shocked. In a good way. I suppose tonally, if you're thinking of Giacchino scores, it would remind me of something like Ratatouille, although that was geared more towards the Parisian angle. But that's sort of that light sense of whimsy, I think. Or maybe you could cite one of his other Pixar scores in that sense. Just to cite some of the track titles. So we've got Seltzer Your Soul, When the Green Bone Breaks, Pickle Your Fancy. Here's one that I like: The Pickle Empire Strikes Back. The Silver Brining. Yeah.
And then the final track, Pickles Sweet, Suite, or Sour, which I think is classic. Yeah. So that is the Giacchino influence there.
Yeah, and I think that was the biggest one he did. I think the final sort of suite. I think that was his main impression on it, really. But I would recommend this one. I think it works as a solo listen. It's very sweet-natured. It's very fun. It has some really good themes running through it that I think are quite catchy and will stick with you. So yeah, it's a winner. So hopefully the movie will be amusing as well and be worth looking at. I'll give it a watch when it finally drops on streaming somewhere. So yeah, thumbs up, I think, from us both there. Sure,
yeah, well, I think the thing is, apparently Nami Melumad is the first woman to ever score for Star Trek. I was reading, so that is a progressive step forwards. So I mean, the representation of women in film scoring is something we'll touch on with reference to another score on this episode. But I did read that and I thought, well, that's terrific that she was brought on board for this, and the fact that it enlisted Dennis Sands as a mixer. I mean, it's no wonder that you can hear with absolute clarity the dialogue between all the various speciality instruments in the orchestra, because Dennis Sands is a wonderful mixer who very often works with Alan Silvestri and brings a lovely clarity to Alan Silvestri's scores. So yeah, I think Melumad and Giacchino have done a terrific job with this.
Yeah, I agree. I think that is. I was trying to then think about people who've scored Star Trek, and I think you're right. Actually, yeah, she is the first one. And even though Q&A is only a short trek, it's only a few minutes. That is really good. It could mean she gets, more, gigs on that franchise in the future potentially, because they're trying to be quite inclusive, I think, and. In what they're doing, they're hiring a lot of female directors and things like that, and people of colour. So that's really good. So fingers crossed, yeah, because she shows real promise, which is great. So let's hope to hear more from her in the future. Let's move on then to talk about another film before we get to, because we're gonna ultimately finish today with your first impressions on Tenet, which is going to be exciting because you've seen it. So, that's, you're one of the few.
Is that something called envy in your voice?
It might be. You might have detected that. But we're going to talk about some TV with Lovecraft Country. But yeah, before we do, let's briefly talk before then about Proxima, which is the new film from Alice Winokur, the French director. And this stars Eva Green as a woman balancing her work as an astronaut, preparing for a long stint on the ISS, the International Space Station, with being a mother to an 8-year-old daughter, and all the family sort of complexities that are within. Again, this is a film that we haven't seen yet because in fact, it was one of those films that and Unhinged with Russell Crowe were the two films that sort of first crept out when the cinemas really started to reopen just about a few weeks ago. That was the first things, for Cineworld anyway, the biggest chain in the UK, really. Those were the two newest films showing. So Proxima probably became a lot more well-known on that basis than it ever would have done in a normal situation. I think it would have been a fairly low-key release. But this has a score by Ryuichi Sakamoto, who is obviously one of the most, if not the most, influential sort of Japanese composer working, who's composed things from going back as far as The Last Emperor, through to things like The Revenant, a few years ago, where obviously, the classic Leonardo DiCaprio lives inside a bear film.
That sounds so wrong when you say it like that.
Yeah, it's true. Puts a whole new complexion on it. But yeah, so in this, he brings his stylings to a film which it balances, obviously, this very sort of, cosmic style adventure with, astronauts and space and that kind of thing, with a very grounded, earth-based family sensibility. And I suppose this one, as opposed to American Pickle, I found this one didn't work for me quite the same way as a solitary experience. I think it's much more ambient, and I feel, Sean, I don't know what you think, but I think this would work really quite well with the movie, but I don't know if it fully works as an independent experience.
Well, it's classic Ryuichi Sakamoto. It's very ethereal, it's very dreamy. There are these long, sort of held chords, long string suspensions that seem to stretch off into infinity. I think I liked it more than you did. I wasn't sure at first, but around the time that we get to the midway point, there are these angelic choral voices that start to be used, which do give a real sense of heavenly beauty. I haven't seen the film, so I can only assume that the voices are in some way Eva Green's character emotionally reaching out to the daughter that she's left on Earth. I imagine that's probably got something to do with it, but it's classic Ryuichi Sakamoto. You think of things like Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence, with that incredibly famous piano theme. There's a lovely video of him performing that live. Actually, there's multiple videos of him performing that live. It's a really magical experience. I think that there is nothing remotely surprising about the Proxima score whatsoever. It is exactly what you'd expect from this composer. He has got a very, very distinctive house style. What I will say is that I think it could almost be a kind of counterpoint to The Revenant, because The Revenant was cold and The Revenant tonally was very similar, but it was much more in the lower registers. The Revenant was about stripping the warmth out of the orchestra, whereas this subtly plays up the warmth of the orchestra. This is more subtly optimistic, though there are darker moments as well, but there is much more of a sense of optimism and hope in this. But they are both scores are two tone poems, one sort of brooding and chilly, this one sort of relatively sort of warmer and more optimistic, but very, very quite clearly hallmarks of their composer. And one should also say, of course, that Sakamoto didn't work on The Revenant alone. He worked on that with Alvinoto. I enjoyed this one more than you. I think I thought it had a lovely beauty about it. Frankly,
I wouldn't say that I didn't enjoy it. I think more I found it. I suppose it made me think of. I know it's not exactly the same, but it made me think of stuff like Under the Skin. It made me think of things like Michael Levy. And that one, even though that score is obviously very tethered to that film, in a weird way, I kind of enjoy that separately as well. There's something about that music which is quite hypnotic. And I don't know if I got that with this, but I do think, like you say, you've described it very well as ever. But in terms of how it sounds and some of those choral things going on, there were points it was lovely, yes. But I think it didn't connect to me, and maybe that's just a personal preference thing in this case. I'm not sure. I think it's pretty good, and I think it's. Like I say, I think it would work really well with the film. I think you're a bit more familiar with Sakamoto than me. He's not somebody. I haven't seen a vast amount of the films that he's actually scored, and he's done quite a lot of things over the years in different countries, both in the West and in the East. In fact, all the way back to stuff like Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence, which starred David Bowie back in the early 80s. So I don't know. I think you know a little bit more about his style than me as well. So maybe you were able to appreciate some of the things he was doing a little bit more, possibly.
Yeah, Sakamoto's career has been extraordinarily vast, and it's very, very difficult to boil down here. But yeah, I think if one were to listen to just a few of his scores, you could discern that style pretty immediately. It's very identifiable. It's interesting that you mentioned Under the Skin there. I think with Under the Skin, what Mika Levy was doing there was actually breaking boundaries in terms of composing an alien language through music, and that was a very, very uncomfortable microtonal score that, when you listen to it on its own terms, it is very unpleasant and very uncomfortable, as it's supposed to be. That's the idea of it. It's very well tailored to the film directed by Jonathan Glazer, but in that she was consciously trying to communicate the inner feelings of the Scarlett Johansson character, who is of course an alien in human form. I think with if Under the Skin was an internal score, I think this Proxima is an external score, and it's about how does the emotion of one woman match itself to the environment of space. That's the impression that I get from it. I haven't seen the film. Like you said, it's terrific that the film has had a sort of more of a degree of exposure than it otherwise would have done. Yeah, I'll have to catch up with it at some point. The film, that is.
Yeah, definitely. I'd like to see it. Absolutely. It was. When I saw it out there, I was like, "Oh, this looks up my kind of street." So yeah, when it eventually drops, I definitely will check it out, and hopefully, I will get a bit more out of the score from the film, and then maybe in reverse, I might get more out of it independently. Actually, if I ever listen to it, solo after watching the film, sometimes it can change your impression. So yeah, I think it is good, and I think it is worth seeking out, definitely, especially if you're a Sakamoto fan. So yeah, I think bigger thumbs up from you, moderate thumbs up from me, but it's still good.
I think that's what's called, Roger Ebert used to call it a waving thumb, didn't he? It's in the middle.
Yeah, basically, a waving thumb. But yeah, let's move then on to TV, and because we are technically a film and TV, music podcast. That's how I badge us on social media, but we don't talk a massive amount about TV. I think the last time we did, we talked about Good Omens and Game of Thrones and things like that. So it's been a while. It's been a good year. And obviously there is some brilliant stuff going on in TV in terms of composing, and there has been for a long time. But we tend to obviously just focus a little bit more on cinema. But Lovecraft Country is obviously the big new thing on TV right now. It's one of the big things in the zeitgeist. And this is, if anyone isn't sure, Lovecraft Country is based on a book by Matt Ruff that came out in 2016. And in this case, it's a HBO series produced by J.J. Abrams and Jordan Peele, and show-ran by Misha Green, who made Underground, which was a series all about the Underground Railroad a couple of years ago. And this has, connective tissue in the fact that it's set in Jim Crow 1950s America, and revolves around a group of black characters in Chicago who head off to the so-called Lovecraft Country, based on H.P. Lovecraft's cosmic weird fiction. And they're looking for the father of a character called Atticus Freeman, who is who played by Jonathan Majors, who comes back from the army, and his father's disappeared. So they go off on this hunt into the darkest recesses of Massachusetts, which is racist and full of horrible, white supremacists and things like that. And crucially, Lovecraftian monsters, basically, to appear. And it is the book is. I won't go too much into it because I don't really want to spoil it for anybody who's going to watch the series. But the book is not what you expect, actually. And the first 2 episodes that have aired as we record have taken people by surprise because they've packed a lot in. And that, I would say, is very faithful to the book itself. But obviously, in a story like this, which is full of all kinds of different things in terms of monsters, in terms of race, in terms of exploring lots and lots of different themes, you need music to complement it. And apart from the use of some really good actual music songs in the first 2 episodes, there is also music by a composer called Laura Karpman, who I hadn't actually heard of until you spoke to me about it yesterday, Sean, and you actually had a conversation with her very recently about her work. So I think it's a good point to actually talk about what she's done with Lovecraft Country and what she's brought to it. So that sounds like it was a really good chat you had with her.
It was terrific. It's really, really great. And we mentioned, I mentioned just a few minutes ago about representation of women in this area, and we spoke at length about this and about how Laura Karpman is an Academy governor, and about how she's attempting to sort of break down these boundaries and set up more seminars for women and get more conversations about women in the industry. But she, as far as I'm concerned, I remember Laura Karpman for that 2003 Steven Spielberg series Taken, not the Liam Neeson series, the Steven Spielberg TV series Taken.
Not the Liam Neeson films where he hunts aliens.
I will find your spaceship and I will kill you. Sorry, it wouldn't be this it wouldn't be this podcast if we didn't do a thrown impression, a bad impression.
No, contractual impression over. Carry on.
But do you remember that? Do you remember that series Taken?
I do, but I didn't watch it, actually, weirdly enough. It's right up my street, but I never got round to it. But I remember it.
It's basically Close Encounters in serialised TV form, but weirdly, the thing I remember is the opening credit sequence set to Laura Karpman's music, which is very, very John Williams-esque. It's very beguiling. It's got a real sense of wonder to it. And I spoke at length with her about that, and she was really pleased that I remembered it. It's really because I must have seen that when I was 16. Again, it's 2003, I think it came out in the UK. So, and she said that she really, really enjoyed working on Lovecraft Country because she collaborated with Misha Green before on Underground with a soul musician called Raffael Siddiq, who is now reunited with Karpman for Lovecraft Country. And she said that what this series does is it balls up everything that she likes. It's a social allegory. It's a monster movie. It's about love. It's about sex. It's about race. It's about all these extraordinary things all bound up together. And she said that it's basically catnip for a composer. And she loved zeroing in on the sci-fi horror elements in particular. And having seen the first 5 episodes of the series, I had to watch the first 5 episodes in preparation for that interview. The show is absolutely crackers in a good way. There is a lot going on, and yeah, you're right. It did take me by surprise. I mean, I've seen things in the first 5 episodes that I didn't think I would otherwise see. And Laura said to me, she said, blimey, wait until you get to episode 7. She said that particularly, wait until you get to episode 7. She said to me personally, you will love it. And I'm like, oh, okay, what does that mean in terms of, like, does that mean that the score is going to be particularly fulsome? I don't know yet. We'll have to wait and see on that. The other way that Laura Karpman has broken down boundaries with this is that she was compelled to record the score for this series while in coronavirus lockdown. Obviously, none of the musicians could get in the recording studio. She couldn't get in the room with them. So she brought together a host of brilliant sound mixers and sound engineers to go, right, Misha Green, as Laura Karpman told me, loves the symphony. She loves the orchestra. She really wants a big kind of symphonic approach to this. How on earth do we do it if we can't, for health and safety reasons, get into the recording studio? So what she did was, rather astonishingly, close mic'd each of the individual session musicians in their own homes and recorded each of them individually, and then decided to double up some of them. And Laura Karpman told me she hates doubling up the strings because it creates, in her words, a fuzzy sound. So she would double up the strings with the French horns or whatever, and then mix it all together to give the impression that what you're hearing is a traditional symphony orchestra recorded in a sound stage. And it's really quite remarkable. So it's the first use of an online orchestra in a TV show. And having watched, it's really impressive. And having watched the series, you wouldn't be able to tell at all. It's very well done. I mean, that's a testament to the skill of the instrumentation and the themes. And there's lots of use of clarinet and saxophone used in often quite atonal, quite brutal ways. But there are tender love themes as well. I think Laura cited to me there are at least 6 themes that she's come up with. She and Raffael Siddiq. It captures the sort of freneticism and the unpredictability of the show very, very well. As I record this now, I kind of feel like the need to watch all of the series in order to evaluate the score properly, to see how the score resolves itself. But I'm really impressed with what I've heard so far.
Yeah, I really like it. I think it's there's so much going on in the show that I think why the score is working is that it kind of complements it without being too, certainly from the episodes I've seen, without being too over the top necessarily. It sort of weaves in with it all and adds to the mixture. So yeah, I think it's really good, and I'm excited to see what else comes of it. I mean, it's just a really enjoyable show altogether, and there is some great use of actual sound and music in there outside of actual scored work. Particularly there was a great in episode 1. One of the best moments was when they overlay a speech from James Baldwin, which is a fantastic montage. Do you remember that bit? It's a brilliant montage sequence where you have him reciting a speech all about all kinds of different institutionalized racism and things like that. It's fantastically done. And in the second episode, at the big climax, what I loved about that was at the climax of the whole thing, which is this ridiculous, sort of mixture of Lovecraft, some sort of Harry Potter madness, but it's not scored with this big bombastic sort of epic kind of thing. It's set to Whitey's on the Moon, which is that brilliant song. It's so good the way they juxtapose, the way that they're juxtaposing music and sound at points with things that historically would have been presented in a much more traditional, epic way. That it's almost like the music is sort of underscoring things in a different way. There's also use of much more contemporary tracks as well, which is juxtaposed with the 1950s setting as well. Lots of R&B and things like that. I think it's very cleverly done, to be honest. Although I did laugh when the episode 2 is called Whitey's on the Moon, based on the song, and on the Skybox that I recorded it on, somebody had typed Whitney's on the Moon. I was like, which Whitney's this? Whitney Houston? Come on, guys.
Gotta love that. Maybe that's where Eva Green was going in Proxima. Maybe she was going to meet Whitney.
yeah, could be. Whitney's up there with Elvis, all the rest.
Yeah.
Jimmy Hoffa, Lord Lucan, they're all there. But yeah, it's so where can people find your conversation then with Laura Karpman? Because I think it's going to be out somewhere, isn't it? Yeah,
that'll be on Film Score Monthly imminently. I need to type that up as we're recording it. I think that you're right. The use of pre-existing songs is great. There's a cover of Cinnamon that plays over the end credits of every episode, which is really terrific. The deliberately anachronistic use of contemporary R&B really threw me for a loop when I first watched it, because in the first episode I was like, hang on a minute, that song definitely did not come from that period. I can tell just from hearing it, and it completely throws you in like that. I think what the music is doing, both from Laura Karpman and Raffael Siddiq, and also the songs, is it's meant to disorient you. It's meant to both suggest the period and also dislocate you, which is very, very appropriate to the works of H.P. Lovecraft, who, despite his racist inclinations, and that is clearly what the show is drawing on, the fact that he was an extraordinary pioneer of cosmic horror. He had, let's say, less than savoury views on some aspects, but he was an astonishing writer. He wrote some really, really remarkably scary stories about the idea that human beings coming into contact with a higher being and their perception forever being changed, cosmic horror, weird fiction and all that. So I think the show and the music do a very, very good job of approximating the feel of what it feels like to read a H.P. Lovecraft story. And the show also uses fantasy and horror as a window into the real horror, which is racial segregation, which unfortunately underpinned a lot of Lovecraft's own views. But his writing on its own terms is fabulous. But I like the way that the show and the music both champion and critique his work.
Yeah, definitely. And I wrote a piece on the first episode, actually, and which I'll put in the show notes, I'll link. But I then posted it on various H.P. Lovecraft groups. I'm a big fan of Lovecraft. I have been for a while now. I've got his entire works in this massive book that makes for great bedtime reading.
The rats in the walls and all that. So that's going to be unsettling.
Yeah. Thanks for that. Thanks for that, HP. Yeah, his stories are fantastic. Like they are uniquely weird and strange, and have fostered, not just an entire subgenre, but an entire mythos and lexicon, but have inspired everybody, like up to Stephen King onwards. Like, his influence is vast, and we're finding right now a real resurgence in Lovecraftian fiction and an emergence of his name far more than we ever have before in the last few years. Lovecraft is everywhere right now, and there's lots of reasons for that, I think. But when I posted that, there were a lot of people who were very resistant to the idea of like they are with a lot of things, but very resistant to confronting the reality of Lovecraft's racism. So there are some fascinating discussions going back and forth. But I think Lovecraft Country is, both in the show and the music, I think it's interesting that it's come out now. Actually, it's fortuitous timing in a way, because the show, in its own way, while still being a big, broad piece of fiction, which ultimately is not entirely really about Lovecraft. Lovecraft is a part of the mythos of that show, but it's not necessarily about H.P. Lovecraft, despite the title. But I think it's factoring into a bigger, broader conversation going on across the world right now about the institutional racism, about our history, our legacy in terms of race. So it's quite fascinating, because I don't necessarily think this... I think this was always pretty much coming out around this point, but it's quite strange how it's landed now, actually, because it's in a good... In that sense, it's in a good position to be part of this wider conversation, I think.
Yeah, timely isn't the word, and I think that the show is at pains to point out that any monsters or any supernatural cosmic horror trappings are an extension of the real terror, which is racially segregated America. That is the real terror, and you feel that very, very acutely through the terrific central performances from Jonathan Majors and Joni Smollett as Tick and Letty, both of whom are really, really great. There are also some very, very fine performances from the likes of Michael Kenneth Williams, and it's a very, very, very fine cast.
It really is, yeah.
Yeah, I'd recommend anyone who can access the show. It's a HBO show. It's on Now TV. I believe as we record this, the second episode has just come up. I'd recommend everyone to go and watch it and to listen to the music as well. It's terrific.
Absolutely, it's a really good show. It's very, very good. So yeah, check it out if you have the means. Definitely check it out, and check out Film Score Monthly for your detailed chat with Laura Karpman. Look, I mean, anyone listening to this, I imagine, knows of Film Score Monthly. But if you haven't, become a subscriber. Check it out because it is fantastic. There's some great stuff in there. And Sean, you contribute to it fairly regularly, don't you? So
yeah,
that'll be really good. All right then, let's get down to business then. Tenet, because this is what everyone's here for. So what we're going to do is we're going to do first impressions on the score and obviously the film from your perspective, having seen it. But originally the plan for this episode was that we were going to talk about the score itself, but the score isn't out yet. The score is coming out roughly aligned with the American release, so we can't listen to Ludwig Göransson's score independently yet, and I haven't listened to it yet. But our next episode, I think the plan is our next episode in a couple of weeks is going to delve into the score in more detail and more about Tenet and things like this, as more people have seen it. I will say in advance that I probably won't have seen Tenet either by the point of that episode, because I'm not rushing out to see it myself, which is obviously a choice lots of people are making right now. Some are going now, which is great. Some are waiting, like me. So I'm going to be relying on you, Sean, to to coach me through this without spoiling anything. And we've said before the episode, we're not going to spoil anything here. You know, Sean, he's very, very good at talking and describing things without spoiling anything. You know, he's been doing it for years. As you all know, listeners, he's very good at this. So we're not going to spoil anything. But Sean, what did you think? What did you think, firstly, of the score in the film, or really, are they both one and the same in a way? Are they both connected?
Oh yeah, they're very, very closely bound with one another. Can I just say, actually, on that subject of spoilers, people who know me, I've actually got a really bad reputation of dropping clangers in casual conversation and ruining things for people. So I have to be very, very careful here.
Were you one of those people who gave the game away about the Sixth Sense?
I'm not sure. I mean, I can't remember. I'm the worst thing about the Sixth Sense was on James Newton Howard's score. The final track was called "Malcolm is Dead," and I was like, "Oh, what? It's crazy!"
That's up there with Qui-Gon's funeral
from John Williams. Yeah. Well, fortunately, I won't be doing anything like that on this. I'll just talk about impressions of Tenet. So, I was lucky enough to go to an IMAX preview screening at the BFI IMAX in Waterloo on Monday, the 24th of August. So, and the first thing to say, the safety guidelines were terrific. We had to wear our masks throughout the duration of the movie, and it's not a short movie. It's 2.5 hours long. So, weirdly enough, the atmosphere of the screening, with people having to sit at least 2 meters from each other wearing masks, had an appropriately disorienting feel of a Christopher Nolan film anyway, in an odd kind of way. And obviously, some of the iconography of the movie involves people wearing masks, or oxygen masks. So that's kind of furthers the comparison a bit. So, I'm not going to give away anything about the movie. I'll just say that on the basis of the trailer, John David Washington is a globe-trotting operative on the trail of a dastardly plot involving time inversion and a world in danger. There's an all-star supporting cast, Robert Pattinson, Kenneth Branagh, Elizabeth Debicki, Michael Caine, Michael Caine. And Michael Caine only gets one bloody scene in the movie, but it's not an emotional scene. But you've got Michael Caine, who's eating steak and chips, and he's giving away a bit of plot exposition, and that is it.
That's it. Yeah,
and that's all that you get from him. And but Michael Caine actually gets the best line in the film, actually, and he also gets a good line directed at Brooks Brothers, the suit makers, which is very funny. So, as with all Christopher Nolan movies, bearing in mind as we record this, I've only seen it once. It comes at you in a ferocious blur of physics-defying, time-manipulating, globe-trotting, mega-budget, ear-splitting action. And I came out of the other side of it thoroughly scrambled and confused by it. Not altogether sure if I was satisfied with the film. I know there are things in it that are genuinely extraordinary. There are sequences where I genuinely thought I've never seen that done on the big screen before. And for that, Nolan's technical ambition needs to be admired. I think I do need to go and see it again to try and work out if there are actually any brains to go with its brawn, because I'm not sure at the moment. I think at its heart, what it's doing, for all its talk about the reversing of entropy, the idea, and things like that, Christopher Nolan has touched on that, it is essentially a quite cheesy evil Russians want to destroy the world kind of movie. Very James Bond. I mean, Chris Nolan's been very upfront with the comparisons to James Bond, but when you got Kenneth Branagh doing the evil Russian accent, they talk all the way through it like this, and okay, right, it's that kind of movie. It's like, I mean, I was like, are we allowed? I was watching it thinking, are we allowed to get away with that anymore? Are we allowed to do that? I mean, just not for purposes of sensitivity, but for purposes of irony. It's kind of like, but
Sean, we all know irony's dead now.
Oh, yeah, that's a really good point.
We're post-irony.
yeah, exactly. So, and there is a problem, and we're getting onto the music, and the general issue that I have sometimes with Christopher Nolan, with sound in Christopher Nolan's movies. I just want to point out, Christopher Nolan is a hero of mine. I want this film to do well. I want this movie to redeem what a horrible sort of prior 6 months of flatlining non-movies. I want this movie to blow away the cobwebs and to draw people back in, because it is, as a feast of popcorn-hungry spectacle that in certain scenes pushes the visual and technical boundaries of cinema. It does do that. I'm just not sure if there's anything behind it, but I would encourage people to go and see it, because this is what we've been deprived of over the last few months. But in terms of the music and the sound, I've often had a problem with Nolan's movies in that sometimes the dialogue goes like this, and the music is going like this, and it's kind of like, it's like, just balance it out, Chris.
It's funny you should say that, because when my wife and I did a big Nolan rewatch. We watched pretty much all of his films before, the arrival of Tenet. Even though we're not going to go and see Tenet, we still did all the films, and we must mainly for an episode of Motion Pictures, my other podcast, where we talked about Nolan's films and stuff. And one of the things we found, and my wife is. It sounds terrible. I sound like an awful person, but I call her bat ears, because she picks up sounds. You're good friends. You're friends with my wife. You've been friends with my wife for a long time, so you know. But my wife is extraordinarily receptive to sound. Like I call her bat ears. I say you could pick up sonar of a Russian submarine. You could, right, in the Baltic. So any kind of sound, she really picks it up. But in this case, Nolan's films would lurch, as you say, from really quiet to like that, and she was like, "Oh, noise, sound," and we had to keep lowering and raising it and lowering it and raising it. And I have to say, I get it. I get it for Nolan's films. Sometimes, and I think it's probably because actually her hearing is normal, and I'm deaf as I'm deaf as they come, right? So I take the mickey out of her for it, but it's probably my issue. But in this case, I got it because, we had to modulate the sound quite frequently. So there is something about the mixing, isn't there, in Nolan's films, which is... Do you think that's intentional? Do you think he does that on purpose?
Yeah, I do. I think that there is meant to be a disorienting onslaught of music, sound, dialogue, pyrotechnics, and I think sometimes he gets away with it. I think... For my money, in Tenet, it was a real problem, because it is a very exposition-led movie. Even though I've said fundamentally at its heart, it's a cheesy kind of Cold War riffing movie, there is a lot of dialogue treasure. Literally every scene, you've got that blunt force Christopher Nolan dialogue in which people are explaining frankly incomprehensible concepts to put to each other. And okay, I'm struggling to keep up with this, and now I can barely hear what they're saying. And there is one scene in which I laughed involuntarily about sort of a third of the way through the movie, in which it's kind of like you've already had this barrage of incomprehensible dialogue for a third of the movie beforehand. And then they decide to set a scene on a catamaran in which people have to yell the storyline at each other over the sound of the roaring waves. And I was like, okay, that almost feels like I'm being goaded. That feels like I'm being needled. And I don't really know why the scene plays out like it does anyway. And it's kind of like, okay, so what you're doing is you're trying to find the most impossible context in which we can actually hear what people are saying to each other. So that is a huge problem. Specifically on the subject of the music, so this is the first Nolan film since The Prestige, I believe, that's not been scored by Hans Zimmer. Hans Zimmer went and has scored Denis Villeneuve's Dune because Hans Zimmer said that was a passion project for him. So Ludwig Goransson has stepped into the breach. Ludwig Goransson, who won an Oscar for Black Panthers, worked extensively with Childish Gambino, worked on the Creed movies, is an experimentalist and a pioneer in his own right and a terrific composer. And I know there'll be people who will say, and I've read several reviews of Tenet now, I deliberately didn't read any reviews before I saw the movie, but I'm catching up on them now, who do the usual thing of saying that the score is just a honking, squawking sort of barrage of noise, but one doesn't go to the standard film review in order for a nuanced examination of the music. They obviously just see it in a fairly superficial way. I thought that it was an interesting score. I thought that it's largely electronic, and there are various textures that kind of burble and variously kind of shimmer away in the background that speak of the fact that the reality that we know isn't the reality that we know, that there is a fabric to reality that can be pulled away, messed with, reversed. And I think the score creates an appropriately discombobulating atmosphere in the quieter moments where I think it's the most effective. It suggests something that's both organic and inorganic through the electronic ensemble that Goransson uses, which I think is very effective. I mean, in the action scenes, it does... I'd say it does threaten to fall into the Hans Zimmer like Horn of Doom, like blaring Hans Zimmer Inception thing, but I don't think it does that. I think Goransson has got a distinctive voice that it doesn't just sound like... I mean, clearly Nolan has a house style, and Nolan has expectations for all of his composers, and he wants music to sound a certain way. But I think from what I heard in the film, Goransson walked within those parameters pretty effectively, actually. And I think it is unfortunate that the movie is already very noisy. And like a lot of other Nolan movies, Nolan wants the music to be kind of big and noisy in the action sequence as well. That's not necessarily the fault of the composer. I mean, how the music comes across in the movie, in any movie, is obviously a direct product of the director as well as the composer. But I do think that there are more nuances in the score than a lot of the film reviewers have made out. I mean, a lot of it sounds like the quieter sections of Inception. There were those lovely kind of teasing sort of underscore melodies in Inception that suggested sort of temporal imbalance and strange narrative devices. I thought, as heard for the first time, I thought in the movie itself, I thought it was one of the best things about the film, and I really like Goransson as a composer. But I now I want to go and see the film again to evaluate the movie and also the score again, and I want to hear the score in its own terms, because I don't think I'm going to get the full picture until I do both of those things.
No, absolutely, yeah. I think I'm very excited to listen to it. I think it will. I mean, he is, and like we say, we will go into more depth with the Goransson and the score in the next episode. But I think he is one of those composers who is making a mark for himself. Obviously, after Black Panther, particularly, which really put him on the map, and yeah, I had a feeling he wouldn't do something exactly the same as Zimmer, but along those, similar Nolan lines. So it's going to be interesting. I'm very, very excited to listen to it. I think it drops on Spotify in just over a week from where we are, I think. So, yeah, by the time we record again, hopefully it will be on there and we can give it a listen and see where we go with it. So right now, and like I say, we'll come back to it, but right now, are we thumbs up, or are we that waving thumb for this? What would you say?
I'd say it's a thumbs up. Broadly speaking, it's a thumbs up. I think that in this instance, the marriage of image and music is meant to be deliberately overwhelming and disorienting. It's clearly a very, very complex film to score. It is on one level about the disruption of entropy, the flow of an object, and yet it's also about temporal disruption, time inversion, and yet all of that is masking what is fundamentally quite an old-fashioned, creaky James Bond throwback pastiche movie that whisks you from scene to scene. So it's clearly a contradictory movie, I think, and that must have made it very, very hard to score. And clearly Goransson is coming off a wave of Nolan movies that have established a very, very singular musical style. So it's like, okay, how do I tweak that and yet also operate within it? I think on first impression, he's done a really good job with it. But once again, I will have to see the film again, and I'll have to listen to the score in its own terms to judge it properly.
And that's a good cliffhanger to end things on, I think there. It's a good pause point. And yeah, we'll come back in the next episode, hopefully, and go into more depth on Tenet. Because it's going to be what everyone's talking about for a while. I think this film and this music, and even though there are other things going to be out, and we will, look at that stuff. We've got Mulan coming up very soon as well, which is going to be another highly anticipated piece of work. But yeah, it's going to be great to go into this in more depth. So we will do that, and we'll also we won't do a playlist as such for this episode because we haven't talked about a great amount of stuff. But we will link the scores to Proxima and An American Pickle in the show notes. And I don't think the score to Lovecraft Country is out yet, actually, is it? I don't think it's online.
No, I'm not sure when that's coming online, actually. But we can probably retrospectively go and add that back in, can't we, to the show notes when it's out?
Probably. And there are some actual quite fun soundtracks out there that people are putting together of the music that's in the show, the actual songs and things like that. So maybe we'll throw something like that up for you to listen to as well. So yeah, it's gonna be great to come back and look at this in more depth. But I am super envious about Tenet, Sean. But I'm glad you got to see it anyway safely, and you enjoyed it.
Just one final thing. I don't know if you saw that video of Tom Cruise going to that same IMAX in Waterloo, going incognito, wearing a mask. Did you see that?
Yeah, I did. Yeah,
which is really terrific. And it's like, okay, so Tom Cruise has come among us mere mortals and has come to watch the new Christopher Nolan movie. That is a sign of how powerful the Nolan brand is, I think.
Definitely. I think there was it might have been a Guardian piece with the headline, Tom Cruise's most audacious stunt yet, going to a movie during a pandemic. But it's going to be exciting. I can't wait to see it. I will update people next time as to what my situation with that is, because I don't think I'll have seen it by then. But yeah, shorter episode from us this time, but hopefully you've enjoyed our ramblings on film music. So thanks for joining us. And remember, we're part of the We Made This Podcast Network, and this new film score music and TV music is not all we're talking about. So we'll give you a taste of what you might have missed on the network in a minute. But until then, we hope you enjoy the music we've discussed, that you continue to stay safe and well, and we'll see you next time discussing the music of film and TV between the notes. Elsewhere on We Made This. Motion pictures. It feels like a film that is a balm, and I never thought that I would feel that about a Tarantino movie. It is by far his nicest film. If you look at it from that context. So
I've seen it 4 times now. I saw it on release on the opening weekend. I saw it then over Christmas, and then I saw it about 6 weeks ago. I watched it. And then I watched it again last night because we decided to do this. And I really like this film. I think the things you're talking about, I think it's a great hangout film. Yeah. And that's what Tarantino's described some of his films as.
Right in the childhood.
They don't see the aliens because they're always in the tripods. And I think the setting where where post-apocalyptic, they've lost all their technology. Yeah. It's become very popular, like very, very popular recently, but this is still prime for a remake, I think. I'd love to see that.
I could see it, especially with shows that you see now that are on. Obviously, Doctor Who's come back and stuff like that. All those dystopian ones like Westworld and all that jazz. Seems like it could be if it's the right person. Like, I get like the BBC could do it, to be fair.
It's fundamentally British. I wouldn't want an American remake.
No HBO.
Well, unless it's HBO.
Pick a disc.
When watching Fries, how hard was it to not think of, if I was behind the sound desk, I'd be...
Oh, gigs are ruined for me forever. Yeah, it's you know, there'll be something that, you know, like a reverb will happen and I'll go, oh, that was nice. And then all my mates are like, Ben, stop it. Just enjoy the gig. The first thing I'll do is I'll always just poke my head over and just go, oh, you're using a Midas Pro 2? Interesting. Okay, cool. Oh, yeah, Digico SD7. Oh, nice. And then the first thing I do and take a picture of it, and they're like, Ben, you're such a nerd. And, yes, I know. Yeah, and but I love it, and that's kind of part of the enjoyment these days.
Check out all of these shows and more on the We Made This podcast network. Between the Notes is produced and edited by Tony Black, who hosts alongside Sean Wilson. You can find Tony on Twitter at AJBlackWriter and Sean on Twitter at Seano22. You can find Between the Notes on Twitter at BTW_notes, on iTunes, your podcast app of choice, on Spotify, Stitcher, and on Spreaker, where the show is part of the We Made This podcast network. For more podcasts all about TV, film, books, music, and popular culture in general, you can find We Made This on Facebook and on Twitter at We Made This Pod. Thanks for listening.